When my son raised his glass that night, I thought he was about to thank me. Instead, he laughed, and the whole room followed. "Here's to my mother, Jessica Brown," he said. "She taught me exactly how not to live." The laughter hit harder than any slap. Faces I'd known for years turned away, pretending it was just a joke. I smiled, because crying would have meant losing twice. But as his guests toasted his success, I remembered something he'd forgotten. Every paycheck that built his empire still carried my signature, and in that moment, I made a quiet promise. He would learn what real failure looks like, and what it costs to call his mother one. The room smelled of money and champagne, sweet, shallow, expensive. Laughter floated above the crystal glasses like bubbles that would burst the moment anyone stopped pretending. I sat quietly at the far end of the long banquet table, my hands resting on a linen napkin that had been folded too perfectly to touch. Evan stood beneath the chandelier, his suit sharp, his smile sharper. He lifted his glass, soaking in the attention as easily as he once soaked in praise for spelling his name right. "Here's to my father," he said, voice smooth, confident. "He built everything I have today." A polite applause followed. I almost joined in, until he turned toward me, his eyes glinting with something that made my stomach turn cold. "And here's to my mother," he added, "who taught me exactly how not to live." The laughter came like a wave, loud, careless, cruel. Someone at the table slapped Evan's shoulder. Another shouted, "Good one!" I didn't move. The stem of my glass trembled between my fingers, but my face stayed perfectly still. I smiled, a small, practiced smile, the kind that hides a wound so deep it doesn't even bleed. Inside, something broke so quietly, no one else could hear it. My son called me a failure. But what he didn't know was that every paycheck he bragged about, every cent that kept his empire alive, passed beneath my signature first. When the applause died down, I placed my napkin on the table and rose. "Excuse me," I said softly. My voice didn't shake. The corridor outside was colder. As the elevator doors closed, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall, a woman composed, controlled, but hollowed out where warmth used to live. The glitter from the ballroom lights spilled across the glass, painting me half in gold, half in shadow. For the first time in years, I didn't see a widow or a mother. I saw a ghost no one had noticed leaving the room. The elevator chimed. In the parking garage, the air smelled of rain and gasoline. My phone buzzed. A new email. From J. Holdings, LLC. Subject, contract approved. Brown Infrastructure Partnership. Confirmed. I stared at the screen for a moment, then tucked the phone away. The city lights shimmered on the hood of my car, reflections bending like ripples on dark water. "Happy birthday, son," I murmured. "Let's see how you handle the world when you finally read the fine print." I started the engine, the hum steady and calm. Inside, the laughter from upstairs echoed faintly in my memory, but it no longer stung. It sounded distant, already fading into something I could use. Every storm begins with one careless spark. Tonight, Evan had lit his. Morning came with the sound of the tide brushing against the shore. I stood on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the ocean breathe. It was too calm for what I carried inside. The house was quiet, but silence doesn't always mean peace. It can be memory in disguise. On the small table beside me sat a faded photograph. Richard and me, 20 years younger, standing in front of the first office of Brown Infrastructure. His arm was around my shoulder, and in his hand was the blueprint of the very first building we ever completed. "Someday," he'd told me then, "we won't just build houses. We'll build something that lasts, our name, our honor." That promise had lived longer than he did. 7 years ago, a steel frame gave way on sight. I got the call while baking cornbread for Sunday service. They said it was quick, as if that made it kind. At his funeral, Evan stood beside the casket, straight-backed, dry-eyed. When people asked why he wasn't crying, he said, "Because I'll make him proud." I believed him. I wanted to. But belief doesn't change the way ambition spoils when it forgets where it came from. After Richard's death, the board insisted I step back gracefully. They told me it was time for a new generation, a fresher face. They offered me a title with no power and a plaque with my name on it. I signed the papers, but not all of them. 32% of Brown Infrastructure, Richard's legacy and mine. I quietly moved into a company I formed under another name, J. Holdings LLC. No one asked, and I didn't offer. People rarely look at the woman who steps out of the spotlight. They forget that she might still own the lights. A year later, when Brown Infrastructure needed suppliers, J. Holdings became one. Each contract, each transfer, carried my digital signature, buried behind layers of corporate paperwork. The irony wasn't lost on me. My own son was signing deals with his mother, and he had no idea. He rose fast after that. Magazines called him a visionary. Investors praised his instinct. I smiled when they mentioned his unmatched business sense. Because I'd seen the ledgers, I knew the numbers didn't add up. They never do when pride counts itself twice. He was building an empire with money funneled through the same contracts I approved. He thought he was running the show, but every payroll, every loan, every gleaming project had my shadow written all over it. I once believed I'd stepped aside out of love. Now I understood I had only stepped back far enough to see clearly. That night, before bed, I opened the drawer of my nightstand. Inside was an old envelope, its edges soft with time. Richard's handwriting curved across the front. I unfolded it carefully. If the company ever loses its soul, bring it home. The final signature will always be yours. The paper trembled in my hands, fragile as memory, heavy as truth. I closed my eyes and whispered to the dark, "Maybe it's time. Richard, maybe it's time I finish what we started." The next morning, a knock broke through the quiet. When I opened the door, I found Mr. Grady, Richard's old accountant, standing in the wind. His coat was soaked, his face drawn and pale. "I can't keep quiet anymore, Mrs. Brown," he said, voice shaking. "Evan's using the company's reserve fund to buy himself a house in Savannah, and there's talk he's about to sell 40% of his shares to a woman named Lydia Moore." The ocean breeze slipped through the doorway, stirring the papers on my desk. I said nothing, only glanced at the folder lying open, our most recent supply contract between Brown Infrastructure and J. Holdings, $40 million. "If he sells," I said finally, "he loses control of the company." I looked up at Mr. Grady, "And when that happens, I'll be the next to sign." He nodded once, relief mingling with guilt, then left as quietly as he came. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, the kind of calm you learn only after years of being underestimated, and dialed a number I hadn't used in a decade. "Robert Keene," came the familiar voice. "Hello, Robert. It's Jessica." He hesitated. "Jessica, after all these years, what can I do for you?" "You can help me let justice speak for itself." He exhaled slowly, and I could almost hear the old courtroom in his breath. "Then I'll start digging. You'll have what you need soon." By evening, the first documents arrived, proof of fund transfers, hidden accounts, signatures that didn't match. Evan was slipping, fast and reckless. I didn't need to destroy him. I just had to let gravity finish the job. I opened a new account under J. Holdings at Atlantic Bank, quietly rerouting the next major payment from Brown Infrastructure. The control would shift automatically, and no one at Evan's office would notice until it was too late. I stared at the numbers on the screen, so clean, so obedient. Numbers don't lie, people do. Once, "I taught my son to count pennies," I whispered. "Now I'll teach him what those pennies cost." When the night fell, I sat by the window overlooking the water. The moonlight spread silver over the small pond beside the porch. My inbox pinged. New message. Contract approved. Signed by J. Holdings LLC. Authorized by J. Brown. I looked at the photo of Richard on the wall and smiled faintly. "You see, love, we're still signing together." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows like a quiet applause. I took a slow sip of tea. Knowing this wasn't revenge, it was correction, the kind that hurts enough to heal. A week later, Evan asked for dinner. He said it was family business. I wore the gray-blue dress Richard liked and the strand of pearls he used to fuss over. His house on the Ashley gleamed under floodlights. Inside, Lydia greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. On the dining table lay a glossy packet, a proposal to sell 40% of Brown Infrastructure to a new brand, Lydia & Co. Evan talked fast about growth and modernizing. His words sounded rehearsed. When I asked a simple question, "So you're selling the company?" he waved it away and told me I didn't understand the direction he wanted. Lydia cut in, thin and polite. "Maybe she's stuck in an old way of thinking," she said. Casual as a knife, I listened. I smiled. I remembered the man whose name still sat above the office door. Evan slammed his palm on the table. "I don't need your approval," he snapped. I rose slowly. "You don't need anyone's permission to be proud," I said. "But don't forget whose name is on that building." I left before the coffee, in the foyer. I watched Lydia lean close and whisper in Evan's ear, "Don't let your mother stop us." Her hand on his shoulder was the exact picture of conspiracy. As I walked to my car, the sky opened and the first rain came. I thought, quietly, that sometimes the best way to watch a man fall is to step out of the net and let him learn the shape of the ground. 2 weeks later, Robert called with the kind of voice that never brings good news. "There's a loan application at Atlantic," he said. $4 million. The signature on the line. It wasn't yours. The paper sat on my tongue like gravel. Evan had signed my name. I told Robert to be quiet and to prepare emergency measures, freeze orders, trace transfers, but not to move public teeth yet. Let him discover the burn for himself. Let the consequence land without my hand pushing it. Meanwhile, Lydia had her own errands. I learned she met Thomas Hale at a hotel luncheon and, without shame, offered internal contracts for $200,000. The next morning, a confidential project brief leaked. Investors whispered. Men I'd worked with for decades called frantic meetings. That night, Evan stood on my porch holding a newspaper, eyes wide, voice tight. "Someone leaked the contracts. I don't know who did this." He looked at me with the frightened face of a boy caught taking candy. "Your father has been gone 7 years, I said. "Perhaps it's not ghosts who trample trust, but the living who never learned how to keep it." He swallowed and looked away. He didn't ask if I knew. He didn't want the answer. Robert texted, "Files ready if you want them." I replied simply, "Not yet. Let him burn his own bridges." Rain tapped the jasmine vines. The scent was sharp and stinging, beautiful and bitter all at once. By August, the air in Charleston carried that still, swollen quiet that comes before a storm. The wind began early, first a whisper, then a howl. I stood on the porch, watching the glass doors shutter while my phone buzzed again and again on the table. Each text from Robert was another crack of thunder. The bank discovered the forged signature. One message read, "They're investigating the loan." I typed back only 3 words, "Keep it quiet." By late afternoon, the sky had turned to steel. The phone rang again. Evan's voice, hoarse, panicked. "Mom, they froze the accounts. The bank said there's a fake signature on the loan documents. Did you do this?" "No, Evan, I said. "The law did," he shouted into the receiver. "You want to see me ruined, don't you?" I looked toward the ocean, gray and endless. "No," I said slowly. "I just want to see you accountable." The wind screamed against the windows, rattling the frames. It sounded too much like every man I'd ever heard panic when the things he built on pride began to collapse. That evening, Robert filed an emergency motion to secure the family's shares. On paper, control of Brown infrastructure shifted back to J Holdings, back to me. Rumors hit the city within hours. Bad loans, internal fraud, investors pulling out. Evan searched for Lydia, but her number was disconnected. He drove to her apartment and found it stripped bare. Only a half-empty glass of wine and a newspaper remained on the table. The headline read, "Thomas Hale acquires Brown's government contract." He finally understood. She'd sold him out. That night, rain pounded Charleston. Sometime past midnight, I heard tires on gravel and the frantic pounding on my front door. Evan stood there drenched, eyes wild. "Mom, please," he gasped. "Don't let them take everything." I handed him a towel. "Helping you doesn't mean saving you from yourself," I said quietly. He broke. The sound that came from him wasn't anger. It was the sound of a man realizing there's no one left to blame. "Go home," I told him. "Be at the office tomorrow. Someone will meet you there." He nodded numbly and left. When the door closed, Robert stepped from the study. "You still care for him," he said. "Very much," I answered. "But love isn't letting him trample his father's name." Lightning flashed over the water. The wind eased. The storm outside was ending. The one inside the boardroom hadn't even begun. Monday morning, the storm had passed, leaving the city scrubbed and raw. Brown Infrastructure's headquarters shimmered with its usual gloss, but inside, tension clung to the air like humidity. Evan entered the glass-walled boardroom, his suit damp, his confidence gone. The directors murmured around him. "J. Holdings is sending their representative," one said. "If they pull out, we're finished." The door opened. The click of heels echoed across the floor. I walked in, black suit, hair pinned high, documents under my arm. Evan rose halfway from his chair. "Mother," I met his eyes. "I'm not here as your mother," I said evenly. "I'm here on behalf of J. Holdings." He stared as if the ground had shifted beneath him. Robert entered next, a leather briefcase in hand. He placed a folder on the table. "For the record," he said to the room, "Jessica Brown, president of J. Holdings LLC, holds 32% of Brown Infrastructure and is the company's primary creditor." A silence thick enough to choke settled over the table. I turned to the directors. "I'm not here to seize anything. I'm here to save what's left. If this company still deserves the name Brown." Evan's face drained of color. He slammed his fist down. "You did this out of spite, just to prove you were right." I kept my voice calm. "No, Evan, I did this because you forgot something your father built into every contract. Honor." He glared. "You'll regret this." "No," I said softly. "You'll learn from it. And one day, you'll thank me." He opened his mouth to strike back, but Robert's voice cut through. "Before you continue, Mr. Brown, you should know the bank cameras confirm it was you who signed those papers. I have the footage right here." The words landed like thunder. Evan froze. Every attempt at defense died in his throat. I gathered the papers before me. "This company will have another chance," I said, standing. "But not through arrogance, through responsibility." As I turned to leave, my heels echoed sharply against the floor. Behind me, no one spoke. When I reached the doorway, the morning sun broke through the clouds, light spilling across the conference room table and the face of the woman everyone had once dismissed as irrelevant. The storm had passed. The reckoning had only just begun. The afternoon sun poured through the tall glass windows of the 20th floor, slicing the room into hard lines of gold and shadow. No one spoke. The air was thick with what everyone already knew, but didn't dare say. Across the table, Evan sat hunched forward. his hands trembling over a glass of untouched water. His eyes were bloodshot, ringed with the weight of sleepless nights and broken pride. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked under its own strain. "You did this to humiliate me, didn't you? In front of everyone?" I looked at him, steady and quiet. "No, Evan, I did this to bring back what you forgot, truth." I slid the folder across the table. Inside were copies of the bank forms, the video stills showing his hand, his signature, my name, written in his script. The evidence was clean, undeniable. The only sound in the room was the low hum of the air conditioner. Robert Keene stood beside me, silent, his face unreadable. He didn't need to say anything. The truth already filled every inch of the space between us. Evan rose abruptly, voice shaking. "I only did it to save the company. You've never lifted a finger to help me." I kept my tone even. "Helping you doesn't mean letting you do the wrong thing." He slammed his fist on the table. "You've always wanted to make me look like a fool. You called me a failure once, and now you're proving it in front of the world." I met his eyes. "I never called you that, Evan. You called me one. But every paycheck you've ever signed, every cent you've used to build this illusion of success has passed through my hands first." The room fell silent. One of the board members dropped his pen, the small metallic click echoing louder than any outburst. Even the air seemed to stop moving. I didn't feel victorious. I saw a child lost in a man's body, reaching for approval in all the wrong places, and realized I hadn't taught him early enough how to stand without pride holding him up. Evan sank back into his chair, hands covering his face. His empire had shrunk to this one room, his reputation outside, waiting to collapse the moment he stepped through those doors. Lydia was gone, and the investors would soon follow. The papers, the evidence, all of it stared back at him like a mirror he couldn't break. I spoke softly, my voice almost kind. "I never wanted to destroy you. I only wanted to remind you who taught you what a promise means." Robert cleared his throat, addressing the board. "Mrs. Brown has agreed to stabilize the company under J. Holdings control on one condition. Mr. Evan Brown will step down as CEO effective immediately." No one objected. The silence was consent. A few nodded, some out of respect, others out of relief. The sunlight caught the streaks of silver in my hair, and for a fleeting moment I felt Richard there, standing just behind my shoulder, silent but proud. Evan's breath came ragged. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he whispered, as if saying it out loud could undo what he'd done. I closed the folder and stood. "Intentions don't excuse consequences. We all sign our names to something. Evan, some of us just remember what it costs." Robert placed the official document in front of me. I took the pen. The weight of it was familiar. Steady. "Sign it, Robert," I said quietly. "Let's begin again, but this time with integrity." The click of the pen punctured the stillness. No applause followed, just the scratch of ink on paper, the sound of justice being written without spectacle. Outside the window, the sun tilted lower, painting the city in shades of amber and forgiveness. Inside the boardroom, for the first time in years, there was peace. 2 days later, I sat in Robert's office. The storm had cleared from Charleston, but the air still smelled like rain and endings. On his desk lay a folder thick with paper, the formal complaint against Evan Brown, forgery, fund misuse, financial fraud. Robert's fingers rested on it as though it were a weapon he didn't want to use. "If we file this," he said quietly, "he'll be prosecuted. There won't be any way back." Outside, the old oak trees bent in the wind, leaves whispering against the glass. I kept my eyes on them. "Withdraw it," I said. Robert blinked, startled. "You're letting him go?" I nodded slowly. "I'm not here to destroy my son, Robert. I just needed him to understand what it costs to forget the truth." He leaned back in his chair, studying me for a long moment before giving a small, knowing nod. The following morning, Evan signed the official resignation papers. His name no longer sat beneath the title, Chief Executive Officer, just a thin signature on the line marked Former. I gave him permission to retain 5% of his shares, enough to rebuild, to start again if he ever learned how. When the story broke, Charleston had its new headline, Jessica Brown Saves Her Son's Company. The local press called me the Iron Woman of the South. I laughed when I read it. They mistook mercy for steel, but maybe that's how it always looks from the outside. Later that week, Evan came to see me at the office. He looked older, humbled in a way life does to those who've stood too close to their own ruin. He paused in the doorway, hat in hand, searching for words he hadn't used since he was a boy. "Mom, I'm sorry," he said finally. "I just wanted to prove I was worthy of his name." I smiled, though my voice came rough with exhaustion. "You don't have to prove worth, Evan. You live it. Your father didn't leave you honor as an inheritance. It's something you have to guard every day." He nodded, eyes shining with quiet shame. "Will you ever forgive me?" "I already did," I said softly. "The moment you started listening instead of talking." He reached out, uncertain, and I took his hand. For the first time in years, the silence between us wasn't war, it was peace. As he left, the weight I'd carried for 7 years finally began to ease. Robert entered a few minutes later, carrying 2 cups of tea. He placed one in front of me, watching my reflection in the office window. "I've practiced law for 40 years, he said, half smiling, "and I've never seen anyone win by not fighting." I looked down at the steaming cup, then out at the city glittering in the late afternoon light. "I didn't win, Robert," I murmured. "I just taught the lesson I should have taught sooner." He chuckled quietly. "You taught it well." The sunlight stretched across the desk, glowing against the engraved brass plate newly polished by the receptionist that morning. Brown infrastructure, rebuilt with integrity. The reflection shimmered like a promise, one not written in contracts or money, but in the quiet mercy that follows justice. 1 year later, Charleston had softened into autumn. The air carried the scent of salt and jasmine, the same perfume the city wears when it forgives you for staying too long. I sat on the porch, wrapped in a light shawl, listening to the sea roll and hush like a heartbeat. The old cat dozed beside my chair, his breathing steady, his fur warm against the fading sun. It had been a quiet year, no reporters, no court filings, no whispers of scandal. The company had stabilized under a new board, and Robert still sent monthly updates, short and polite, ending every note with, "The foundation is solid again." I no longer asked for details. I had learned that peace doesn't always come from knowing everything. It comes from finally not needing to. A soft knock sounded from the front gate. The postman stood there, cap tilted, holding a single envelope. "Afternoon, Mrs. Brown," he said. "Just this one for you today." The handwriting stopped my breath for a second. Uneven, careful, familiar. Evan Brown. I opened it slowly. Inside was a check for $2,400, neatly folded, and a short note written in the same shaky hand. "This one. Mom, I signed it myself." The words blurred for a moment before I could smile. My chest tightened, not from pain, but from the small miracle of humility printed in ink. I set the letter on the table, the sea breeze fluttering its edges, and looked up at the endless horizon. "So," I whispered, "you finally learned how to sign it right." The cat stirred, stretching. The jasmine petals trembled on their stems. Somewhere down the shore, a child's laughter floated up, bright and fleeting. I have weathered many storms in my life, but none have felt this still. Not because the wind has stopped, but because I no longer need to fight it. When evening fell, I brought the letter inside. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. In the study, I opened the drawer where I kept Richard's belongings and took out his last letter, the one that had carried me through everything. His handwriting, bold and sure, curved across the page beside Evan's hesitant scrawl. 2 letters, 2 signatures, 2 generations, one that built, one that learned. I placed them side by side inside the box. For the first time, they didn't feel like memories. They felt like continuity. Outside, the sea shimmered in the sunset, copper and gold. I stepped into the garden, barefoot, the hem of my white dress brushing through the fallen jasmine. The wind rose gently, lifting the petals into the air before letting them fall again like soft applause. The horizon caught the last of the light, and I turned toward it, eyes calm, hands empty. The revenge had ended long ago. What remained was something quieter, stronger, redemption. Some storms destroy, others cleanse, and in the end, mercy was the only legacy worth keeping.